The maximum 401k contribution is on the rise again, and it's important to know how these contributions and these limits work so that you can take full advantage, because you may want to contact your employer or update payroll or even change your plan if you're self-employed. So that's what we'll talk about in the next couple of minutes here. We're going to go over the mechanics of these contributions, what the updated limits are, and this is for 2024 and beyond. These limits might stick for a couple years, or only time will tell. And we'll also go over some frequently asked questions about 401k plans in retirement. Note that I'll be using the term 401k, but these rules can apply to other types of plans like 403b plans, 457s, the TSP. But what we're going to talk about generally does not apply to those IRA-based workplace plans. So if you have a SEP or a Simple, for example, they're going to have different rules and limits and features. And it's important to know that not every plan is the same. So when employers set up their plans, they can choose which features and how they want to arrange things. So what somebody else has available to them might not be the same for you, and vice versa. So always check with your employer or your plan administrator or whoever handles the plan to learn exactly how your plan works, because it might be different from what you've heard elsewhere. Starting with some basics, there are two ways to get money into these 401k plans. So there are employee contributions and employer contributions. The employee contributions are those that you, the employee, make to the plan. So you choose to send a certain amount of your earnings into the plan to save for later. So for example, you might choose to contribute 15% of your pay, or the maximum contribution, or a certain dollar amount per month, whatever the case may be. That's an employee contribution that you control, and the amount you put in is generally up to you, up to these maximum limits. Then on top of your employee contributions, the employer might make contributions on your behalf. So those might be matching contributions. For example, if they say, we will match 4% of your pay as long as you put in at least that much, or they might be a flat amount. For example, they're just going to put in 3% of your earnings. And there may be other formulas and other types of contributions that the employer puts in for you, but those don't come out of your pay. Those come out of the employer's bank account. Traditionally, those employer contributions were always pre-tax contributions, and that's probably more or less going to continue at least for a couple of years here. But Secure 2.0, some recent legislation, made it possible for employers to put money into your accounts as Roth-type dollars. That's a pretty new feature. Not many people, or any that I'm aware of, are currently offering that as of the time of this recording, but it is likely coming. The issue is that there are still some uncertainties out there, so employers are not necessarily going to rush to embrace this, and the vendors don't even necessarily have it available for employers if they wanted it. As a result, it's probably wise to think of those employer contributions as pre-tax contributions, and you would eventually owe income tax on that money when it comes out of the plan or when it comes out of a retirement account, because you can move assets from a 401k into another retirement account, typically without tax consequences, as long as you do it correctly. Generally, with a direct transfer is the cleanest way to do that. When it comes to employee contributions, or the money you put into the plan, there are more choices. So you might be able to put the money in as pre-tax so that it reduces your income for the year and reduces your tax burden in the current year. Or you could potentially choose to make Roth-type contributions, and that's where you do not get a tax break today. The money goes into a Roth-type account. It's similar to a Roth IRA, but different. Of course, it has a higher limit, and it's in a 401k. It's not an IRA. But as long as you satisfy all of the IRS requirements, you could eventually take that money back out in retirement without having to pay income tax, and that can be helpful. There are also catch-up contributions, and those are available if you are 50 in the year in which you contribute. So if you turn 50 in November or February, doesn't really matter. As long as you are 50 in that year, then you can make the additional catch-up contribution on top of the basic plan limit. And then some plans also have voluntary after-tax contributions, and this is part of what's called a mega backdoor Roth strategy in some cases. That's where you can put in additional money on top of all the other things we've talked about, and that can potentially help you sock away a lot of money, but it's pretty rare, which we'll talk about in a minute. So looking at these 2024 numbers, the limits have increased. So you can now have up to $69,000 go into a 401k with an employer under your name. Now, a portion of that might be your contributions. Some of it might be the employer, or it might be all one or the other. It just depends on how things are set up. So that's an increase of $3,000 from 2023. The salary deferral, or the employee contribution, the amount that you choose to put in, has also increased slightly by $500. You can now put away up to $23,000 per year. So be sure to contact your employer if you want to take advantage of that. Not everybody contributes the maximum. In fact, a lot of people just don't have the means to do so. But if you are fortunate enough to max out your plan, then you want to stay on top of this and make sure you get that extra $500 put away. The catch-up contribution did not increase this year. It stays at $7,500. Those contribution limits change periodically as a result of inflation, so keep your eye out for future increases in future years. It's not every single year. As we look at the different money types here, it's interesting to see how this might have changed just a little bit. So you can see that in the matching row there under Roth, we've got a partially filled star. And so what that's trying to get across is that it is currently available under law, but it's not necessarily practically available. So I wouldn't expect to find it, although you might be able to find it out there. And as time goes on, it's going to become more and more widespread. But the matching contributions going into a Roth account are pretty rare right now. This same goes for other employer type contributions. So as long as you're going to be fully vested in a contribution, it could go into a Roth type account. But again, it's still early, so we're not seeing that all over the place yet. So let's look at an example of how you might max out your retirement plan. We're looking at $85,000 of income. You make the maximum salary deferral or employee contribution. Then there's a 4% match, and you happen to be over age 50, so you're going to make the catch-up contribution as well. With your salary deferral plus matching, you've got $26,400 so far, but that's not quite the $69,000 limit, so what could potentially happen? There's remaining room of $42,600, so is it possible to fill that in and get those dollars into your account? Well, yes, there are a couple of ways it might happen, but it just depends on the plan rules and the situation. So one option is if your employer is making, let's say, matching or additional profit sharing or other types of contributions, those could potentially add to that and possibly even fill it up so that you get to that $69,000. Another option is if your plan offers those voluntary after-tax contributions and you happen to have the free cash flow to put in an extra $42,600, you could potentially do that. Once again, it's not feasible for everybody, but this is how you can use these different buckets of contributions to eventually get to the maximum limit. Then, of course, if you are over age 50, you can do the additional $7,500 on top of everything else. Now let's get into some frequently asked questions and things that often confuse clients, but briefly, I am Justin Pritchard and I help people plan for retirement and invest for the future. And in the description below, you're going to find some general retirement planning resources, not just about your workplace plan, but bigger picture stuff. I think you'll find that very helpful. And it's also important to remember this is just a short video, so you really need to verify the details with your employer, your tax expert, and anybody else who is familiar with your situation. People often wonder about mega backdoor Roth, so let's talk about that for a minute. This is different from the backdoor Roth contributions you might have heard of. That's when you put in money because you earn too much, you put it into a traditional IRA, non-deductible, and then typically convert it to a Roth IRA. This is mega backdoor Roth, so we've added the word mega, indicating that it is bigger because you can put away quite a bit more. As I said, you can get up to $69,000 potentially, and the way it works is you do your salary deferral, let's say, but you've got more room in your 401k and you've got more cash flow, and let's assume that your plan allows it, which is a big assumption. When that's the case, you can make these additional voluntary after-tax contributions. And then ideally what happens is those more or less instantly get converted over to Roth. That might happen inside of your 401k, or the money might move out to an IRA. It just depends on how things are set up, but it would move out to a Roth IRA. And that way you have a mega backdoor Roth contribution. The challenge with this, aside from having the cash flow, is that a lot of plans won't allow it. And that's because plans need to follow certain rules to make sure that they're benefiting everybody in the organization. So not just the owners, not just the high earning people, but really everybody. So when you add this feature to the plan, it can mess up those non-discrimination tests. And ultimately, a lot of employers just decide they're not even going to offer it. That said, if you do have this feature, it's a pretty nice deal. So it's probably worth taking advantage of to the extent you're able to. Now let's look at how you might be able to max out that $69,000 with a little bit of help from an employer. So this isn't saying that you're going to put it all in yourself out of your salary, but the employer might help you get there. So how might that work? This is most likely if you're a very high earner. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars per year here. This is not everybody, but in some cases, if you have high earnings, when there's an employer contribution, it can really boost up the total amount that goes into your plan. So let's say you make $345,000. That happens to be the maximum compensation limit they're looking at for 2024, and there is an employer match. We might assume that there's a 15% employer contribution, sort of profit sharing, and that's going to be $51,750. You're also doing 3% of salary deferral, so that's $10,350, and there's a reason you're doing so little, by the way. There's also a 4% match, which is going to be $10,350, and the total that goes in is going to be $72,450 from all of those sources above. Now we have exceeded $69,000. $72,000 is more than $69,000, so there's an issue. Something needs to be adjusted. So what might happen is you might reduce the amount that you put in yourself so that most of the money comes from the employer. Taking this to an extreme, your employer might put in 20% for you. That'd be a very generous employer, and based again on that maximum compensation amount, it happens to be the same number of $69,000. And just like that, you would be at the maximum limit for the year. Now, you could do an additional catch-up contribution if you are 50 or older, but this is a way where employers can more or less contribute to your plan and completely fund it for you. Here's another common question. Will those employer contributions reduce the amount that you're allowed to contribute, or do those go against your $23,000, for example? And the answer is generally no. You can see the extreme case there where the employer contribution completely funded the plan, but that's unusual. Let's say you want to contribute $23,000 and your employer contributions add up to something like $5,000. Well, in that case, certainly no, the employer contribution does not directly necessarily reduce the amount you could put in, so you could still do your $23,000 of salary deferral. Next question, do IRA contributions affect 401k contribution limits? So if you contribute to an IRA, does that reduce the amount you can put into your 401k? Again, the answer is no here. So you can go ahead and max out your IRA. And then if you also have the cash flow to max out the 401k, that's great. You're welcome to do so. Now let's look at that in the opposite direction. So does contributing to a 401k limit your ability to contribute to an IRA? Again, the answer is generally no, but there are a couple of things to be aware of here. So contributing to a 401k can potentially make it easier for you to be qualified for a Roth contribution or to make a deductible contribution to an IRA. That is, if you reduce your income enough with your 401k contributions, then you might be able to make IRA contributions more easily. But one thing to be aware of is that being eligible for a 401k can affect your ability to make those deductible IRA contributions. So if you're eligible and your income is above certain levels, check with the IRS for those details. Then it can be more difficult to make those pre-tax IRA contributions. Another question is if you can get separate limits for the pre-tax and the Roth employee contribution. So can you basically double that $23,000? The answer is no, unfortunately. You have one $23,000 limit, and you can use that any way you want. If your plan offers Roth, you can put it all into Roth, or you can put it all into the traditional pre-tax, or you can mix and match in any way you want. That might be 50-50 or 70% pre-tax, 30% Roth, or the other way around, 30% pre-tax. It's just up to you and what's best for you. It's important to know that when you do make those Roth contributions, those are still eligible for a Roth. So don't think that you need to make pre-tax contributions just to get the matching contribution from an employer, because any Roth-type salary deferral contributions you make are going to qualify for a match, assuming you qualify. Next, what happens if you have multiple jobs or multiple employers? Can you double up or anything like that? And the answer is it kind of depends. So once again, the salary deferral contribution, that $23,000, you only get one of those per year. So across all of the different employers, you don't want to do more than that in terms of contributions as an employee. However, when it comes to employer contributions, you can potentially max out multiple plans. Again, this is really only going to happen for people who earn a lot, again, hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. So it's not everybody, but it may be possible. And it's probably important that the employers be unrelated, not under the same ownership. Or if you have multiple businesses, I would not hold my breath on being able to start multiple 401k plans and do it that way. You really do want to speak with an expert before you try any of that. But if they are truly unrelated employers, it may be possible. And there is also one exception. That's for people who have a 457 plan. This might be if you work for the city government, for example, you could potentially get an additional employee contribution limit. So that's the exception where you could possibly double dip. But for most people, you've got one per year. So now you're ready for 2024 and beyond. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please leave a quick thumbs up. Thank you and take care.